We get questions like this quite often. What do we do? How do we know who our customer is, what their company name is, that kind of thing. So the question is, who are you selling to? Who is your customer? So we're going to be talking today about trying to figure out who your customer is, whether or not your customer is incorporated. If so, where are they incorporated? What kind of business entity are they? What kind of due diligence do you need to do on your customer before you enter into a contract with them? And why does all that matter? And we'll give you a couple of resources to use as well. Hopefully that'll be helpful. So again, hopefully that is helpful to you in trying to figure this out. So going back to it, it's really sort of the starts of the contract basis. Who are you contracting with? Who are you entering into an agreement with? And I know, looking at the list of people that have signed up today, I know a lot of you go through a very rigorous due diligence process of looking at, because you're issuing credit. I guess to an extent, all of us are issuing credit to our customers one way or another, but you need to know who you're dealing with. Is it a sole proprietorship? Are they incorporated, or are you dealing with them individually? Is it some form of a partnership now, or is it a corporation, an LLC, or LLP? And some of you deal with business associations. What kind of entity is that? And it really is important to know what kind of business it is, whether or not they're incorporated, whether or not it's a sole proprietor. If you're dealing with someone who, say for example, I come into your business and want to enter into a contract with you where you're going to provide either services or some maybe labor or materials for me, and it's my business name is Vann and Son. I could be incorporated, or I may not be, or I could say Vann and Son, comma LLC, and not actually be incorporated, even though I have the LLC name behind the Vann and Son. It may not be. I may not be incorporated. I know a lot of companies, a lot of individuals that'll put Inc. INC or company in their name, and they have not done anything to incorporate their business. Or say, for example, that someone incorporates their business, and say they incorporated 10 years ago, and their corporate charter has been revoked by the Secretary of State. So therefore, they don't really have a corporation in existence anymore. What does that mean to you? So all of those things really do matter, and it really makes a big difference. So I want to make sure that I stress upon you to make sure that you know who you're contracting with. And we're going to talk about name changes, that kind of stuff as well. So has the corporation or any of the principals ever filed for bankruptcy? That would be a question that you ought to ask. If it's on your contract, if you have an application, say a credit application or some other kind of corporate document that they need to fill out, it's, again, has the corporation filed or has any of the principals of the business ever filed for bankruptcy? Another question to ask, and this was probably more so before the recession, that we were encouraging our clients to ask, is whether or not any principals had ever been a shareholder or owner of a company that filed for bankruptcy. Because what was happening was people would start a business, it would file for bankruptcy. They individually would not, but they would as a corporation, and then they turn around, the owner would, and open another company up right after that, and do all that again. So those are some questions to ask. When was the business started? Was the business incorporated? So when? Those are good questions to ask. It starts the process. Where are they incorporated? Is it North Carolina or another state? As you well know, there are a lot of companies that are coming into the state of North Carolina now from outside, just because of the economy here. So it's one of those questions you need to ask: where are you incorporated? And you need to verify that then, whether or not they are incorporated in that state. And then also North Carolina. So some resources that that hopefully would be helpful to you. One is the Secretary of State of North Carolina. And if you go to www.sosnc.gov and then go on there and look under for the corporations division, and it'll say, I want to, and it gives you a list of things, put search or research for a company name. That will tell you, you can get all kinds of information about your customer there, or any other company as well. Most states, at least I haven't done a full search probably across the whole country, but we have a lot of them. Most of the states have Secretary of States that offer the information online. Over the years, they've gotten a lot better. And some states, actually, you have to set up an account. And some of the states will only tell you, yes, to confirm the name, and you have to buy the other information. Thankfully, in North Carolina, you are allowed to see most all of the reports, all of the documents or filings for a business entity in North Carolina without additional charge. Our Secretary of State has done a great job of making that database more search friendly, and you can gain a lot of information that way. Also, if it's a licensed business, say for example, it's a general contractor or say electrician, someone who has to have a license, most of the licensing departments in the state of North Carolina have a website that you can go on and research the business name, the license issue, whether or not there's any issues at all. Architects, I'm trying to think of some others. There's a whole bunch. Engineers. Of course, any kind of trade that has a license, you should be able to go in and check out whether or not the company actually has a license and gain a lot of information. So that's a great resource. And one more is D&B, Dun & Bradstreet. And I know some of you use Dun & Bradstreet, others probably do not. It's not inexpensive, but it gives you information. There, again, tons of other information, and I hate to say it, but go to Google. Google is a good one. And you can learn stuff about individuals or companies that way. But do some due diligence. I won't use the names just to protect our clients, but we had a client one time before who entered into a contract, and they weren't real sure who they dealt with, and as far as the company name. And I was like, oh my goodness, man, business must be really good because they just sort of opened it up based off of a limited amount of information they had. And of course, when it sort of fell apart, they were trying to go back and put the pieces together again. That's probably not the best time to figure out who you're selling to. We've had a bunch of these issues pop up, so I'm just going to try to talk with you about some of them, and hopefully that helps you and resonates with you and helps you in determining how you should go about doing some due diligence. We had a company or client one time who was dealing with a company out in the western part of the state. And the guy's name, I can't remember the exact name of the company, but let's just say it was, I'll say D&B and Sons Company. And he was incorporated under that name. And then over a period of time, his checks changed to D&B Sons, Inc. His telephone number changed. I think his fax number may have changed. I can't remember. And I think his physical address changed. Other than that, the logo stayed the same people were in place. He never said a word to anybody, but it was just that small of a change. And so obviously he didn't pay our client, so we sued him. He said, hey, look, sorry, you got the wrong, we realized there was another company, so we sued both of them, the one we had previously and his new company with that slight change. And he said, you can't do that. You didn't contract with me. I was like, yeah, we did. And you changed the name, didn't tell anybody. Thankfully, we were able to prove that he did not tell anybody at the company. Of course, we had our client known, and they didn't change anything. They could have been left chasing just the old company that had no assets, nothing, no recovery efforts. And the judge agreed with us, but we had to go through a pretty much almost a day trial to get through all those issues because he was throwing up roadblocks. So I say that to you just to try to say, look at what's going on with your customer. We're going to talk about that just a little bit, but look at what's going on with your customer. Do you see a change in the name? Are the checks changing? Does the address change? Phone numbers are a lot easier today. They don't change as often as they used to if you had to move. Those are signs that something might be going on. And I know some of you have dealt with this before, where you're dealing with an individual, the individual sells the business, new person comes in, everything stays the same. Well, the question is, really, did it all stay the same? Is it still the same business entity? They might have bought the assets, but they probably are running it under a different name. So you got to be cognizant of that issue, number one. And number two, ask the questions. Is this the same business or is there a different entity? About whom do you want to know? Or, who you trying to figure? You want to know who the principals are of the business. Who are the owners? That is a huge question to ask. And I know if you're dealing with a huge company, it may not matter who the principals or the owners are, but if you're dealing with a locally owned business, you want to know who those people are. Are you mailing or emailing the invoices and statements? And if so, to whom? You need to know who that person is, how to get in touch with them. Some people have a question on their application or the contract, who's authorized to purchase? That's not a bad question to ask. The one thing I would get you to think about is if they list one or two people and then those one or two people aren't there and they allow someone else to come in and purchase, is your business designed or set up to verify, hey, look, our customer only gave us two names and you're not it, so I can't sell this to you. Do you want to have that? Or are a purchase orders required? That's another question that we see quite often. But again, think through that a little bit. Think about what you need to do to safeguard yourself and what information you're going to hold on to and collect to help you with that process. So what else do you want to know? Well, you obviously want to know their name, their address, try to get home addresses as well, telephone numbers, social security number, employer ID number, email addresses, as much information as you can get because getting it early helps you. And then the business information. Who else are they doing business with? What references can they give you? Try to get bank account numbers if you can. That way you can contact the bank and inquire with them. So we've got a poll question we were going to submit. So you should have a poll question getting ready to pop up on your screen in just a minute. Michael Fernald, who is a big help in our office, is doing that for you. So the first question is, do you typically research your customer to know about their credit worthiness before signing a contract with them? So there's a couple of 4 answers for you that you get to pick. So give us your opinion there. So we're coming in. Y'all doing a great job. So if you're sleeping, at least hit a button so it'll vote one way or the other. Y'all are doing well. We got almost 70, almost 80%. So we'll give it a few more seconds, and then we'll close that out and show you the results. So again, the question there. So let's close that out, and we're going to look at the results for you. So do you typically research your customer? So 55% said always, and then the next would be sometimes, 27%, and then most of the time. So thankfully, no one said never. So most of you are checking. Over half of you are checking the customer before you sign into a contract with them. So thank you so much for voting, showing us that poll. So after your customer signs the application and the contract, does your customer complete the application or contract, or does somebody in your staff, the sales staff, somebody else do it for them? Let them do it. If you notice that it's the same handwriting on all the applications or all the contracts, you probably need to let them do that and find out who's doing it on your behalf, because that could come back to bite you down the road. And another question is, does the customer sign the application in front of you or an employee of your company, or is that remotely? And it's nice sometimes if there's a witness, because we probably have all heard the case where the customer says, well, I didn't sign that. Well, I understand that, but it looks like your signature. And sometimes you obviously can tell they didn't sign it, but did they give someone else authority to sign for them? But at the same time, after you entered into a contract with them, you started providing services or materials, and then all of a sudden, there was no problem. So you got to think about that. So one of the questions we've gotten is, what about electronic signatures? That's where we're heading to. So great question. Thank you for doing that. So does the customer sign the application and send it back by fax or email, or do they do it electronically on your website? So is that legal and is it binding? The question is yes, it is binding. Even though you don't have the original, most of the time you're not going to have a problem with that. There could be cases if it involves real estate that you've got to have it, the original that is, or certain, if it's certified, if it is notarized, we would encourage you to get it back. Most of your, obviously most contracts Some of your contracts might be notarized, but most of them aren't. But even if it's electronic, email, fax, text, all that stuff, that is enforceable. You just got to be able to show it and prove it in the format that you got it back in. So do you keep the original? We've talked about this over the years. Many of you have been involved in seminars that we've done about, there's two pieces of law. One's called UETA, U-E-T-A, and another one is called e-sign. One's federal, one's state. And both of those pieces of legislation say that now in business, for the most part, you can have the electronic version, and it's just as well as having the white paper and blue ink copy. So hopefully that helps, and that is enforceable. So what other information is important to you? What about if you're involved in a construction world? Obviously, lien history is important. Are there judgments out there against your customer? That'll tell you some history about them as well. Are you looking at the federal tax ID number? Make sure that it's consistent and is accurate. Are they sales tax exempt? Do they require purchase orders? Is there credit limit sought? And a lot of times, if you're setting up, let's say you're a supplier or you're a vendor, and that used to be a question that everybody used, is what credit limit are they seeking? Some states have said that's could be a bar that if you raise it above that limit and didn't tell them the customer could use it as a bar for having to repay back anything above that. North Carolina has not adopted that, thankfully, and a lot of us have encouraged our clients to change that wording to say monthly anticipated purchases. Gives you some idea. So again, that's just sort of some ideas about additional information. I'll give you one other fact scenario that just happened not too long ago, where one of our clients dealt with had a customer. They had a credit application that the customer had filled out, and just say the company name, was consistent with their business. So I'm going to call it Acne, A-C-N-E Company, right? So it was Acne Company, and they were a good customer. Everything went fine. Well, the customer came in and said, "Hey, look, I created another business entity, and I want to use that name. I want to open up an account with them as well, and I want to call that one Buster Company." So you had Acme Company and then Buster Company. And so, the customer, our client, the supplier said, "Hey, look, he's been a great credit risk. I didn't have any problems." Filled out another application for Buster Company. And so, again, this was in the construction setting, so it had lien rights involved. He comes in, he says, "Hey, look, I've got a new job. Just put this one under Acme." And they said, okay. So they opened up a job account under Acme. Everything's going fine. He ran up about $100,000 bill and then didn't pay. And so the customer, our client, called us, and we started digging into it. Of course, he was a subcontractor on a project under Buster Company name. And we sold everything under Acme. Well, Acme, we billed it under Acme. We invoiced it under Acme because that's what he said. All the materials he picked up. We didn't drop ship anything to the actual project. And so we didn't have any, the argument was we didn't have any lien rights, so we couldn't prove it. And because of the issues involved in the way it happened, we're like, we can't even, there's no contract terms getting us to the project. How do we do that? So we sued him under Acme Company because that's who we had. Thankfully, we had him individually as well on both Acme and Buster Company. But at the time, Acme wasn't doing any other work. And it went for about a year and a half. He was still buying from the supplier under Buster Company under a limited basis. They really kept a tight leash on him, which they should have. Eventually, we realized that he was doing a fairly large contract under Acme, and we were able to jump in and grab the money, which he was not real happy about, but our client was happy, which is the main thing. But the reason I say that to you is just that I had that question from some of you guys earlier. is what happens if our customer has more than one business name. You really got to make sure, especially in the construction setting, that you know what company they're using in that construction line of contracts versus one that they just choose to use. And if you do have personal guarantees, get them personally guaranteed across all of their companies to give you some protection. So another question was, if they require a PO, a purchase order in the billing, is that valid if we don't get it, if we don't get one? So if they require a PO in the billing and we don't get one, I think that's the question, right? So if they're asking for one and we don't require one, then yeah, that could be a problem. I've had that with payment bond claims before, especially. Hey, look, we require POs. There's not a PO in order, even though we know it came from the customer and that we provided it to our customer. That could be a bar. So yes, you got to make daggum sure if they say one's required that you get one. Absolutely, it's a great question. So thank you for that. So looking at the signature block of your contract, this is something that we would encourage you to change. A lot of you, I know we've dealt with your credit applications or contracts. If the word seal, S-E-A-L in parentheses, if it's on your signature line, what that means is it changes the statute of limitations from 3 years to 10 years. You think, I'll always enforce our contracts within 3 years of the breach. You probably will, but it's just a nice way to give you a little bit of extra protection in case for some reason something happens. So again, make sure that we would encourage you to have the word seal there on the line. The same thing with the date. A lot of times, depending on the type of contract it is, I'm amazed if we look at 100 contracts, I bet you 10 of them don't have a date of the date that it's effective, that is the contract's effective date, or the date it was signed. And then you're trying to piecemeal when the contract came into effect. And sometimes that matters. So I would highly encourage you to make sure there's a date field and that the date is actually included in there. So that would be helpful to you. So what happens if there's a name change? So what we would encourage you to do, there's some language here. The applicant agrees to notify a seller in writing by certified mail, return receipt requested within 7 days upon the change of any information given to seller in the application or contract. So this is something that we started suggesting to our clients a number of years ago, that you would have in your contract with your customer, so that the applicant is your customer. So if they're giving you all their information, their name, their tax ID number, their corporate name, who the owners are, who the principals are, that kind of thing. And so the idea is, if your customer, if anything changes about their business, in essence, their name, if they change their name, they're supposed to tell you within 7 days, send it to you written, certified mail, return receipt requested. The reason I like that is it's actually helped us tremendously over time when the company name changes and you're continuously selling to the company that you set up, but there's been a slight change and they're now running a new company and you don't even know it. Having this in there gives you some protection that and especially if you got personal guarantees, you've got somebody to go after because they breached the contract and you're still selling, but they now are saying, hey, look, that's an old company. We're not using it anymore. It gives you the right to go after them for that, plus the personal guarantees and potentially, hopefully, the new company, because they're the ones who are getting the benefit. Just just a little pointer that would be helpful to you. So what happens if the name of your customer changes? So is it a corporate name change? For example, did they go to the Secretary of State and actually officially change the name? Is there a question that you got to ask and got to figure out? Did they actually change the name? Or did they just create a different entity with a close name to it, a closely associated name? It could be a DBA. It could be like an assumed name. It could be a division of, say, the company that they're running. So you really need to think through that a little bit. But again, if they've set up another company and they basically shut the other one down, you could be in a bad situation trying to figure out who you're going to sue and whether or not you have the right to sue them. Even though I think you do under a lot of different avenues legally, I think you could probably get to that pretty easily. depending upon the facts, but especially if you have a personal guarantee under the company that you set up. If you don't have one, obviously under the new company because you didn't know it existed, you may or may not be able to sue that individual. Again, I think you could probably allege fraud or something of that nature if that exists, if that's factual, and probably get to that. So we've got one more poll question we were going to pop up for you. So appreciate, again, your input on that. Hopefully that'll be helpful to all of us. So that's getting ready to pop up here in just a minute. So the poll question is, most of our contracts today are paper or electronic? So again, most of your contracts, are they paper now or electronic? So we're doing pretty good. You're coming in on the voting. That's awesome. I appreciate that. So we're going to give you about 2 more seconds. You're 100%. Awesome. So what do you think? Paper still. Most of the contracts today, 77% are paper, 23% electronic. So I'll tell you, I'm a little surprised by that. But again, not a bad thing at all. Contracts are, paper is nice to have it. And I know a lot of you turn it into electronic after that. So not a problem at all. So again, back to what we were talking about, what happens if the name of your customer changes? Let's say you're in the middle of a project with them, in the middle of this contract, and they change their name. If they've told you, it's one thing. Or if they sold the business, if they sold the assets and now someone else is running it, you really got to stop and think, all right, do I still have the right people on the hook? Am I still dealing with the company that I initially started with? And I'll tell you, if you have any question about that, please call us. We'll be glad to walk through that with you. We won't charge you for it. We'll take a look at it with you and just try to help you figure that out. But that is a really, really important question because I know it happens a lot. Or if, say, for example, that they don't even tell you that the name changes and there's a totally different company now. What do you do? Again, depends on the facts. You may or may not have recovery rights against them. Certainly against the old company you do, but if there's nothing there, if they've closed it down, then you're sort of looking at an empty bucket. That's not a fun place to be looking. But again, I hope that helps. And again, please call us if you ever have any of those questions or that happens. So signs to look for. Again, if you see the name change or slight difference in it, if you see a bank account change, as always, should perk up your ears and your brain and try to figure out what's going on. Is there a change in the ownership or key personnel? If Joe or Sue was running the business and everything was going well, all of a sudden they're gone. Somebody needs to be asking the question, what's going on? Why? What's the change? Check the Secretary of State's website. See if they've made any changes there. Is there a slight change in the name? Does it matter? It probably does matter if it's a slight change. It may be legit that they've just changed or updated their name, but it could be meaning something else. So those are some things to sort of look out for. Some customers may have multiple companies. We've talked about that to reduce their risk. So again, who you're contracting with, who you're dealing with, you want to know that. You want to ask for personal guarantees. I would encourage you to ask for personal guarantees. You want to reduce your risk as much as possible. So again, looking for that, knowing who you're dealing with is really important. And if they've changed the name or if they have brought in a different owner, sometimes they might bring in someone buys into the company. You need to ask the question if that's the same company or if it's a different company or how they're running it, if it looks different or not. So how long should you consider keeping documents regarding your customer? I would tell you at least 7 years. And if the relationship is still going on, keep it 7 years after it ends. That should carry you a long way. If for some reason, even the statute of limitations could be 10. If it's fully resolved, there's no issues by that point, more than likely it's not going to be a problem. But at least 7 years after the relationship has ended. If the name of your customer changes while doing business, how should you reflect the invoicing? Again, you really should be going by what is on your contract. And if they've changed the name, then y'all need to have some kind of documentation to reflect what that name change is and what the impact of it is. What's the effect of that name change? Because I can tell you, legally, If there's a name change, more than likely there is some significant legal uh, ramifications of that. Is it a new entity? Did they have to get a new tax ID number? Is it a new filing with the Secretary of State? That all says it's a new company. So again, it should reflect, your invoicing should match the contract that you have. Now again, if they change the name from the time you have the contract, there should be some kind of a modification to document that so that you all know that. And then are you dealing with the owner of the company? Somebody asked a great question, should you go above, you're dealing with someone who's more of an administrative type person. Should you go over their head and go to the owner? Absolutely. If you have a question, go to the owner. Great way to get started. Check the Secretary of State, their office, to know for certain. And if you doubt, like I said, go to the top. Doesn't hurt anything. Because again, that's what they would do if they're trying to get a contract signed and they need to know who the owners are. That's a great way to figure that out. And if your customer owes you money and the business entity of your customer changes, does that impact your account receivable? It could. And that's why I say know exactly who you're dealing with and what kind of business entity that is through the whole process as best you can. I know some of you deal with hundreds and a couple of thousand customers at a time. You really need to know what's going on and keep an eye open for that. I hope this is helpful to you. We get these kinds of questions a lot. We really enjoy and appreciate the trust that you give us. We don't take that for granted. So thank you for letting us help you and partner with you on that. And if you have any questions, please feel free to call me or email me. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. And if you're not connected with us online, we would really appreciate you doing that. It'd be very helpful to us, and we hope that we're helpful to you. Thank you so much, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you soon.